Is this really a beginner pattern? It looks a little complicated to me. Hello everyone. So I have this pattern all cut out here. I have all my pieces in my box. That's my extra fabric that I have over there. And I figured I would just walk you through this quilt, at least one block, and show you how it's done to see if it really is a beginner pattern. I did make some changes in my cutting because it told me to cut these white strips of fabric at width of fabric and then to subcut them and do the same thing with this red. And then later on we would be sewing those two together, but I thought that would just be a little bit too complicated, so I figured I would just cut the two strips of fabric and then place them right sides together and then just sew down the whole strip unit and then subcut it into the pieces into the size that I need. I just figured that would go a lot faster and it would make things a little bit easier. All right, so I sewed down the whole length of this and now I'm going to cut it into the size that I need it. The pattern told me to press this open, and normally I would have pressed it to the dark side, but I figured since it's my first time doing it, I would make one test block and then make sure that I'm pressing the right way. This is going to be for that little unit right there. So now I'm just going to double check to see what size I need to be cutting these units into, and then I'm going to subcut these strips, and then we will move on. And I have everything in my little project box here, but I'm going to get started. And I'm just going to pull out the pieces that I need to make one block because I want to do one block first and then just kind of see how difficult it is, because the pattern says it is beginner, but I don't know, it looks a little complicated to me, but we'll see how it goes. And I'm going to leave a link for this pattern in the description box down below. I got it from Fat Quarter Shop. It was a PDF printable. So I'm just going to lay out all my pieces here, and I realize that I'm missing two pieces, but I do grab them out of my box later on. And because I've never made this pattern before, I'm going to be constantly checking and referring back to that because I want to make sure that I'm doing everything correctly. So the first thing we need to do is make some half square triangles. So I'm just going to take my white squares here and draw a diagonal line on the back side of both of these. And then we're going to lay them right sides together with our red ones and sew a 1/4 inch from each side of that line. And then we can cut them in half and we will end up having 4 half square triangles, which is what we need for each block. And I'm sorry if I sound a little off today. Apparently everybody in our household is sick. And of course, it's only a matter of time before mom gets it if the kids all have it. So I have already sewn a 1/4 inch on each side of those lines there. And now I'm going to just take my ruler and rotary cutter and just cut along there. And then I'm going to be using my slotted trimming ruler to square everything up to the size that I need. I will leave a link to all of the stuff that I use in my description box down below if you are interested in any of these products. All right, once those half square triangles are pressed and squared up and everything, I'm going to take the last 4 little squares here, the white ones, and draw a diagonal line on the back side of all of those, because now we need to do sew and flips on here so that we can have a skinny little red line. So when you're placing this on, you just want to make sure that your drawn line is going the same way as your stitch line there in the center of your half square triangle, if that makes any sense. And you just want to make sure that everything is lined up very nice and neat. And then we're just going to sew right along that line or a thread's width beside it, just so that everything is going to be accurate. And then once we've sewn along there, we're just going to flip this corner over and give it a good press. And that's what's going to give us that little line there. And these are the corners of our baseballs. So I've already sewn on there. You can't really see because my thread is kind of a little bit too matchy. But before I cut anything, I'm going to flip these over and I'm going to double check that everything is lining up nice and neat, because I don't want to end up having it sticking over too much or not all the way to the edge, because we want these blocks to be nice and square. That way everything is just going to line up a whole lot better later on when we're putting the whole block together. And I am using my rotary cutter here because I do want these cut lines to be a little bit more accurate, because with white it does show through. So I went and grabbed those other two pieces out of my box. That's from my strip unit that I had before. And here you do need to be careful on how you're placing these together, because we need to sew these on either side of one of those units. But one triangle's corner is a little bit smaller than the other one. So if you place it like this, you can already see that it's not accurate. Unfortunately, I did not see it until I had sewn a whole unit together and then I realized it was wrong. So I had to fix it. So just make sure that when you're placing them, that you're placing them in the correct orientation, because otherwise it's not going to turn out looking correct once you're done. And then I'm just going to be bringing these over to my sewing machine and I'm going to sew these together. For here, I just did one block at a time, but once I had done this and I realized that it was actually a lot easier than it looked, I ended up doing the rest in a batch. And this is the last quilt top that sewing machine pieced together before it conked out on me. So once we have those units done, we are going to take this center piece here and we're just going to lay it like this and sew these together, and that's going to be our baseball. It doesn't look much like a baseball yet, but it will, trust me. So I'm just going to lay these right sides together and pin them in place. This quilt is going to someone very special, so I want to make sure that everything is lining up very accurately. So I have that all done, and now I realize why they wanted to press open. There is so many seams here, and if you would be pressing to one side, it would be so bulky. So for this pattern, I recommend that you follow the pressing instructions. Now we need to do some more sew and flips. So we're going to take our little blue squares here. I've already drawn a line on the back, and I'm just going to line these up in the corners. And here I'm going to make sure that everything is lining up very nice and neat. And I will be pinning. I do not want this to move. So I just brought that over to my sewing machine and I just did one corner at a time because, like I said, I want this quilt to turn out very nice. It's going to a little baby boy who's been through way more than any person ever should have to in his few months of life. And we are so blessed that he is finally home from the hospital and he's doing good. And I hope that he will cherish this quilt for a long time to come. So once we've sewn those on, we're just going to make sure that we flip that up before we make our cut here. And I'm just going to line my ruler up with a stitch line and cut a 1/4 inch away from the stitch line. And I'm just going to repeat that on all 4 corners. And then we are going to move on to the last step of this block. So for that, we need to take our last little squares, or I guess the bigger squares here, and we need to cut these in half, but we're going to be cutting them on the diagonal. So we're just going to be cutting both of these on the diagonal, and then these will be going onto the block, and that will kind of put our baseball on point, and it will just give it a little bit of a better look. So to do that and make sure that everything's lined up nice and neat, I'm just going to take my block and I'm going to fold it in half and just give it a good finger press there, just so that I have a little crease there, and that's going to be my center point. That way I can line my triangle up and I don't end up shifting it too far to one side and my block ends up looking all wonky. And then once we've done that, I'm just going to open that back up and then we're going to take our triangles. And I don't know if you can see it, but it does have the little creases there. So we need to do the same thing to our triangles. We're just going to fold those in half as well and give them a good finger press. And that's going to give us a crease there. You could mark it with a pen or another tool, but I'm just going to do this. So you're just going to line up that center point and you're going to see that that top corner is sticking over and it's going to be doing the same thing on the bottom. But that's totally fine. That's the way you want it to look. This is just going to give us a little bit to trim later on, but it will make everything look a lot nicer if you do it like this. So we're just going to sew that with a 1/4 inch. And once that's done, we're going to press that open. And here we didn't have to press the seams open anymore. I just followed the instructions on the pattern and everything turned out really nice. So I'm just going to clip off these little dog ears on the side. That way they're not in my way when I want to sew the last 2 sides on this block. And that process is going to be exactly the same. I'm just going to take my whole unit like this. So just fold it in half again and then mark your center point there with a crease. And like I said, you could use a pen if you wanted to, but I prefer not to. Or you could even use a pin, but then I'll probably just stab myself. So this just is easier and safer for me. And I would really appreciate it if you would give this video a thumbs up. It really helps my videos get out to more people and it helps my channel grow. So I'm just going to do the same thing with the triangles here, and then I'm going to sew that on with a 1/4 inch seam and square up the block. And at this point, I can tell you that yes, this is beginner friendly. It is actually very easy to put together. So here's the block all done. I scored it up to the size that it's supposed to be. But now we're going to make some more blocks, and I need to make those little 16 patches in there. And I don't think I'm going to film all of that because, well, 16 patches are pretty basic. So this is what the 16 patches look like that go in between the baseballs. But me and the sister that's helping me pay for this quilt, because quilting is not cheap, we both decided that we wanted it to be a little bit more personal. So I decided I would sew the top row together and then the bottom 3. And then I would take out that second row from the top. And then we decided that we would put his name on there. And this way it was just, more personal. So I took it out just to kind of see what it would look like and how wide I wanted it. And I ended up making his name using Lori Holt's spelling bee book. And it turned out great, I think. But now we had these extra blocks, so we were like, okay, well, what do we do with these? And I was just like, oh, well, why don't we just take one baseball and one 16 patch, and we're going to lay those right sides together, and then sew all the way around the outer edge, leaving an opening so that we could fill it up with some stuffing and make adorable little pillows for in his room. I think that would look really cute, and my sister agreed, so that's what we went with. So I just put some clips on there to hold it in place and then made sure that I left an opening for turning. And once I had sewn it on there, I realized that I wanted a piece of batting on there just to make the front look a little bit smoother for when after I stuffed it. I didn't even take it apart or anything. I just cut a piece of batting and sewed it on there as well. And then I turned it right side out. And some of the corners are a little bit finicky, so I just use a pin to pull the corners out. And then I just stuffed them full and I hand sewed mine shut because I figured that would look a little bit neater But anyways, here is the quilt and the two little pillows that I made out of it. I'm very happy with how it turned out. I just did a simple crosshatch quilting on it on my sister's machine because mine was broken and I didn't have my new one in yet, but I do have that now. Let me know in the comments what you think, and that's all I have for today. Thank you so much for stopping by, and until next time.